While we often view colonialism through the lens of 18th and 19th century European expansion, the psychological architecture behind it, the urge to dominate, control, and to civilize others, is a recurring pattern throughout human history. From the steppes of Mongolia to the deserts of Arabia and the courts of Europe, why does the human mind feel compelled to remake the world in its own image? This is the May 2026 brand new episode of Exploring Brain and Mind, and today we're tackling a heavy, complex and deeply human topic, the colonialist mindset. And I'm sure I'm scratching only the surface with all this, because this is very, very complex. Let's first look at the evolutionary psychology of domination. Is the urge to dominate hardwired? Biologically, humans are social animals, but also tribal ones. Across evolutionary history, controlling territory, resources, and social hierarchy increased the odds of survival. But humans took this further. We developed complex identities, symbolic systems, and ideological frameworks that transformed simple competition into organized domination. The human brain thrives on predictability. When we encounter a culture that is radically different gods, customs, moral systems, or social structures, it can produce discomfort and uncertainty. For some individuals and societies, the response to this discomfort is not curiosity, but control. By reshaping the other into something familiar, the environment feels less unpredictable. Humans do not compete only for resources. They compete for status. In evolutionary terms, status often meant security, influence, and reproductive advantage. Entire civilizations can display this same psychology. Expansion becomes proof of superiority. Conquest becomes prestige. And not to forget, power can engage the brain's reward system. Influence, dominance, and expansion may reinforce feelings of control, status, and success, helping explain why empires often continue expanding long after practical necessity has been met. Now let's look a bit at the global history of the civilizing mission. We often focus on Western colonialism, but the psychological blueprint is not unique to the West. The urge to civilize, save, or correct the perceived inferior other has been used by many powers throughout history. Does anyone remember the Mongol Empire? Genghis Khan did not merely seek territory. He imposed administrative, legal, and communication systems across Eurasia through the Pax Mongolica. Local hierarchies were often dismantled and replaced with Mongol structures of rule. Then we have the Arab conquests. The rapid expansion of the early caliphates spread not only political control, but also a new linguistic and religious framework across vast territories. Existing traditions were often absorbed, transformed, or displaced with a broader civilizational identity. And of course, with the European colonial powers. European empires later framed expansion through the language of Christianity, Enlightenment, racial hierarchy, and modernization, arguing that conquest was not exploitation, but uplift. So what is the core pattern to all this? The common thread across these cases is the belief our way of life is the correct way, and by forcing you to adopt it, we are helping you. This is domination disguised as moral duty. The next section is about the psychology of othering and superiority. How does the mind justify domination? It begins with othering, the psychological process of reducing another group to something less complex, less civilized, or less fully human. When people are framed as primitive, savage, spiritually lost, irrational, or backward, empathy decreases and domination becomes easier to rationalize. The superiority complex is when a culture believes it possesses the ultimate truth, whether religious, political, scientific, or moral. It creates a psychological mandate to spread that truth. The colonizer does not perceive themselves as a villain. They perceive themselves as a teacher, a liberator, or a savior. And the belief systems, they become the moral armor. Religion, ideology, and belief systems often become the moral architecture of domination. Once a group believes it possesses a divine truth, historical destiny, ideological purity, or scientific superiority, conquest no longer feels like aggression. It feels like obligation. The internal narrative shifts from I am taking power to I am helping these people. And there is a link between sacred justification and cognitive immunity. When domination is framed as God's will, revolutionary necessity, historical progress, or moral enlightenment, disagreement is no longer seen as legitimate dissent. It becomes ignorance, evil, or backwardness. This makes systems of domination psychologically self-protective. Criticism of the system is interpreted as proof that the dominated simply do not understand what is good for them. And you might or might not agree that there are modern echoes. Today, the colonial mindset has not disappeared. It has evolved. It is no longer expressed primarily through flags and military occupation. But that is still going on. Let's not forget that is still going on. But now this is happening through cultural, economic, technological, and especially technological, and ideological dominance. We see it in assumptions about what counts as developed, modern, or progressive. If a society does not embrace Western style consumerism, liberal individualism, or industrial models of success, is it viewed as different or deficient? Good question. We now have the digital and cultural hegemony. Global media, technology platforms, educational institutions, and international policy frameworks often export one dominant worldview while marginalizing alternative models of living, like, for example, alternative health. So what would be a good antidote if the drive to dominate is a recurring human tendency rather than the trait of one civilization alone? Then decolonizing the mind must be a universal project. It means noticing when we assume that difference equals deficiency. It means recognizing when discomfort with other worldviews triggers the urge to fix rather than to understand. What could lie beyond the colonial mindset? And that following phrase has been with me for years. Collaboration over competition. I do believe this is possible. If domination is one recurring response to difference, collaboration may be the more mature alternative. The most advanced societies are not necessarily those that erase difference, but those that can engage with difference without needing to dominate it. Psychological maturity means being able to encounter another worldview without feeling compelled to conquer, convert, or correct it. Pluralism does not necessarily mean every belief is equally valid. It means acknowledging that no culture, religion, ideology, or civilization holds a monopoly to wisdom. Human progress has always been collaborative. Mathematics was preserved and expanded through the Islamic Golden Age. Paper and printing transformed the world from China. Ancient Indian traditions contributed to mathematics, philosophy, and medicine. Indigenous societies developed sophisticated ecological and agricultural knowledge long before industrial modernity. Civilization itself is not the product of isolated superiority. It is the product of exchange. To transcend the colonial mindset is to replace the question, how do we make them like us, with what can we learn from one another? And that last question is one of my favorite questions. What can I learn from other people? Sometimes it's useful things, and sometimes it's even how I do not want to be. So, in conclusion, whether it was Genghis Khan, the Umayyad Caliphate, the British Crown, or Spanish Crown or French Crown, they all had colonies, even the Dutch and the Portuguese had them, or modern superpowers like the United States. The pattern remains remarkably consistent. The human struggle with difference often becomes a struggle for domination. The colonial mindset is not confined to one race, region, or era. It is a recurring human temptation. The civilizing trap is that conquest is almost always rebranded as education, liberation, enlightenment, or progress in order to soothe the conqueror's conscience. But if we can understand the psychological roots of domination, tribalism, status seeking, fear of difference, moral absolution, we may become more capable of resisting them. Basis again, self-awareness and the awareness of others, having an open mind and a willingness to listen and learn from others. Because perhaps the next step in human evolution is not greater power over one another, but greater humility before one another. And that is a big one, to remind all those on the very top that one total control of the planet and of humans and animals and plants and everything, to stop accumulating more and more and more, because in the end they can't take it with them. We all have to go that way one day. Even they do, if they like it or not. And that brings us to the end of the May 2026 episode of Exploring Brain and Mind. Share the episode if you have some open-minded people that are willing to listen to this, because I know this topic might kind of trigger a few emotions and voices, but it needed to be brought out since I shared a lot about indigenous mindsets and things like that in past episodes. So I wanted to look at this other side. Share the episode with others, as I said, and if you haven't followed or subscribed yet, the podcast is on Spotify, on Apple Podcasts, on Amazon Music, and on YouTube. The next brand new episode will be in June 2026, and in between that, have a look at YouTube at weekly re-releases of early solo episodes. Thank you for listening.